we're going to do for Resolve yet. And for inspiration, we were talking about, one of either Nimbus Cloak or Demolish, right? So, and at this time, we were still talking about replacing Champion with Giant Slayer. That was our original plan. Was what we were talking about doing here. So we're having these conversations about, okay, adding Kraken Slayer, and this is going really smoothly. And basically, the like some of the people on the implementation side of things, like the engineers and the artists, were like, hey, look, we have the ability to do more. We've seen in your design docs that you have more, like designs for these. Do you want to do more minor runes? Because we could probably do them. And we were like, hell yeah, we would love to do more runes. And so basically, like, it was a pretty fast conversation around like, hey, we have more implementation budget to do more minor runes. Do you want to do more minor runes? And we were like, yeah, we do. Let's do 6, right? Like, so pretty quickly we ended up deciding on the runes that we have here, where we had a lot of these designs that we really liked. And we just very quickly, we were just boom, boom, boom. Let's just like, let's get 6 minor runes because we can do it. So it's basically just a combination of really great circumstances around like the way that our timing worked out for the like the people on the implementation side of things and the artists and the VFX people's like, because some of these runes have VFX, right? It's like, and that's not free, right? We have to have a VFX artist make those, stuff like that, right? So stuff like Demolish had to be made. Ultimate Shield has VFX. Scorch has VFX, right? It's like, these things are not free, right? And so we weren't really sure that we could do all this stuff at the same time. And it ended up that, fortunate combination of circumstances, we were able to do all this stuff. So that's kind of how, like, the summary of the runes process is what I'll say is like, combination of, we were prepared. We had a lot of these designs ready, far enough ahead of time that people could not only give us feedback, but like understand what we wanted to do. And number 2 is like, we had a lot of implementation resources work out in our favor here, where we were able to do so much stuff. And I was really happy with how this all worked out. And I'm really thrilled about the system. So to be clear about this, the minor runes that like technically that I like own are Scorch, Ultimate Shield, and Demolish. I am super excited to be able to put Demolish in Wild Rift. It's something that I've wanted to do since I joined the team. It's something I've wanted in Wild Rift ever since I played the game the first time years ago when it was in beta, like in our internal alphas, testing, or like, well, not even internal alpha testing, in our internal testing back when I was on the game analysis team, and I tested, one of the very earliest versions of Wild Rift. I think probably the first version of Wild Rift that was ever in testing for anyone. I played back in the day. One of the things I always wanted was Demolish. So I'm super thrilled that I was able to put Demolish into the game myself. And that's one of my runes here. So it's like, I'm really happy about it. And I'm really happy with all the minor runes. I'm really excited about Ultimate Shield. Obviously, it's a new design for Wild Rift only. At least at this point, if PC wants to have Ultimate Shield, they're welcome to it. It's a new design that I originally pitched like, it's from a scrapped set of changes that I pitched like 6 months ago or something like that. Like I pitched this last year sometime. And Ultimate Shield was something that, ultimately I think the design didn't work out for like implementation reasons. But Ultimate Shield though, I was really happy about, and it was something I really wanted to get in the game. Thanks for the hydrates. Does this mean Jace can spam Ultimate Shield? We eventually landed on Jace swap does not trigger Ultimate Shield as the final implementation, I believe. There was still some debate going about that as we locked the patch, but I believe that is the current implementation, is that Jace swap does not trigger Ultimate Shield. Okay, so I think if anybody has any questions specifically about the runes process, because sorry, I wasn't looking at chat at all, so I'm trying to catch up now. Corki definitely works, by the way. I believe Teemo works, but I don't remember off the top of my head. But Corki rockets do trigger it. I believe Teemo's mushrooms should as well. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe Teemo's should. But I think the distinction was made because Jace Ultimate unlocks at level 1. Like Jace Swap unlocks at level 1, that it's not technically classified as an ultimate in our systems. Which has to do more with our documentation and all that stuff. Patch notes are not out, no. Those come out later. How strong is Ultimate Shield compared to Fimbulwinter Shield? I don't know how to make that comparison. I don't even know what Fimbulwinter's shield is off the top of my head. I do know what the Ultimate Shield's numbers are off the top of my head, but I can't tell them to you. That'll be patch notes time. I want to ask, Nimbus Cloak will be useful in Wild Rift environment? I think it's pretty useful. I think it's good on some junglers, especially. Some AD carries can get some good use out of it. I think it's a good rune for the inspiration tree, because champions that, like, there are some AD carries and some junglers that aren't really excited about a lot of the stuff that's in the inspiration tree in general. And I think this is a good rune to fill in some of the slots for them. I don't expect it to be crazy popular, but I think it should be good for a good subset of champions. Will that patch 3.2 be ADC meta inspired? We'll see. I mean, you know, who knows, right? Like, I certainly don't know. But this is a lot, you know, the two keystones are obviously going to be pretty favored towards AD carries a lot of the time, right? So, we'll see. Can we get a reset on Ult Shield if Ult gets a reset? No. Definitely pass. What other rune are you thinking of? We'll see. I mean, you know, there's definitely some possibilities of some rune revamps, I think. Brutal, Champion, Pathfinder, Loyalty, Phase Rush, Font of Life. There's lots of stuff that I think we could revamp and get good value out of in the future. Not to say that this is, like, any of this stuff is going to be anytime soon, but that's the stuff we're thinking about in terms of, like, I think at this point, we're not super likely. It's not guaranteed, right? But I don't think we're super likely to just try and add new, like, more new runes. I think more likely in the future, if we do runes changes, they're probably going to be changes to existing stuff. So we'll see. No promises here, right? Like, you know, there's no guarantees. But I think more likely future runes content is going to be revamps of existing stuff more so than adding new stuff. Will Kraken Slayer on Vayne stack? Yeah, it works the same as it would work on any other champion. Her Silver Bolts doesn't have any particular interaction with Kraken Slayer. They'll both apply on the same attack if you attack a champion 3 times. Morning Instep came late. Hope to you post VOD. Thoughts on Mastermind with demolishing the game now? Mastermind will be receiving some changes in this patch. I can't talk about what those changes are. You'll have to see those in the patch notes. But Mastermind will be changed. What about Dark Harvest? I don't think we're very likely to do Dark Harvest because it has so much overlap with Electrocute. I think we could add something we've talked about previously is adding some elements of Dark Harvest into Electrocute, where, like, you know, it's like it scales with the number of times it's triggered or something like that. Is something that's cool that we've talked about. We haven't, like, seriously talked about implementing it or anything like that, but it's like a cool idea that we've talked about a little bit. Kraken Slayer does not interact with Runon's Hurricane. Kraken Slayer is an on-attack effect. Runon's Hurricane applies on hits, but Kraken Slayer is on attack only. So it does not interact with on hits. So the weird interaction that you might see, this will be a little bit weird, and I think it is something that we're talking about potentially fixing for 3.3. The weird interaction you might see with Kraken Slayer is that the max stack effect, and this is how other on-attack effects work in Wild Rift, by the way, the max stack effect will apply on hits, where it's like, if you stack your Kraken Slayer and then you, like, use Ezreal's Mystic Shot or Fiora's Lunge, that will consume the Kraken Slayer proc to deal damage, but it does not, like, those effects will not generate Kraken Slayer stacks, essentially, if that makes sense, right? Like, essentially the way it works is that they on hit effects can consume can consume Kraken Slayer, but they cannot stack it. Which, again, I think is weird and wrong, and we would like to change it. But there's no guarantees we will be able to fix that, because that's just, like, one of the features of our systems currently. So it would be like a fundamental rules change for us to do that, but it is something we want to do. Like, my team definitely wants to do that overall. How about Yasuo with Kraken? Yasuo Steel Tempest is an attack, so it does work on Yasuo Steel Tempest, just like it works on Shyvana's Twin Bite, where Shyvana Twin Bite is an attack. So it will work on those types of effects. Empowered effects as well, like Nasus, Siphoning Strike, etc. Those are attacks, and they will work with Kraken Slayer. Thoughts on Kraken Slayer being a rune instead of an item? I talked about... So I didn't go in detail on, like, why I think it's so much better. So number one, Kraken Slayer in PC is a mythic item, right? It's like we don't have mythic items. There's not really much motivation for us to do Kraken Slayer, where, like, sure, we could do a, like, intended first item, AD carry crit item with, like, AD, AS, crit, and, like, the Kraken Slayer passive. It's like, we already have Stormrazor, right? It's like, That would basically be like the spot that Stormrazor is in, and we don't need like multiple items in that slot really. Like we don't think there's much benefit to that. So doing Kraken Slayer as an item in Wild Rift wouldn't really make much sense, right? Like there's not really much value in that. So essentially the reason why we wanted to do it as a rune is because we wanted an effect in the rune system that would compete with auto attackers that may not want lethal tempo or might have some contextual reason why you would take it as an auto attacker over lethal tempo. So true damage helps here a lot, where there's a lot of context on why you might value true damage over a generic, which is better against, you know, people who have a lot of resistances or damage reduction, than something like Kraken Slayer, which is just a generic stat, which is the same against everyone, right? So the true damage is good here for contextual purposes, and then the fact that it is essentially an on-attack effect means that it should be really good on champions that already have attack speed steroids or attack resets, where lethal tempo already won't be as good. And so the intention is that these runes should carve out their own spaces respectively, where like we expect the lethal tempo space to be a lot bigger than Kraken Slayer, but we also expect there to be a space for Kraken Slayer on champions like Tristana or Lucian or even Shyvana, right, where they have attack resets or attack speed steroids or attack effects that they can apply, where there's a lot of value to having the like Kraken Slayer type of effect in the system. So I assume you guys revamped the UI to add all these runes. I spent if you go back and watch, you can go back and watch the VOD for the full story, but basically it ended up that we didn't have to completely revamp the UI to add 2 runes. But I'm not going to get back into that story because you can go through the VOD if you want, if you check that. NSTEP, are you one of the developers? Yes, I am a game designer on the systems and balance team. That is what I do. And I am also the person who owned the designs for Kraken Slayer, Lethal Tempo, and 3 of the minor runes in the current patch, or in the 3.2 patch. So yes. Let's see. Why Guardian turned into an item then? Honestly, I'm not sure what the motivation for that was originally. I think there's nothing wrong with Guardian as an item. Like, it's just a fine item. I do think that there could be some things we could do to up the satisfaction on Guardian, on the Guardian's Orb for sure. But I think it works fine as an item, right? Like, I think there's lots of effects in the rune system and the item system that could easily be translated to one or the other, right? Like, for whatever reason, players see these systems as like being really distinct, but there's a lot of effects that honestly have a lot of overlap that could work in either system, right? And, you know, there's nothing to say that we couldn't, you know, take another rune from PC and make it into an item, or vice versa, right? Or that they couldn't do the same thing for us, right? Nothing wrong with that, right? It's like, I could easily see an item in PC that uses Ultimate Shield, right? For example, where it's like, and if PC wanted to make that item, I'd tell them to go ahead and make it, right? Like, you know, if they wanted, you know, if they asked me like, hey, do you think it would conflict with your Ultimate Shield? I'd be like, no, like, hell no, of course it wouldn't, right? It's like, I have no problem with that. I don't even know if they'd even ask me, but they'd probably ask me about Ultimate Shield, right? Because I am the person who designed Ultimate Shield. I think you already answered this. Will Scorch scale with AP? No, Scorch is intended to be an early game rune. It does not scale with AP. It has some mild level scaling. But, you know, what exactly all of the details of the runes are, you should just wait till patch notes come out. Balance step, that's me. Or system step. I mean, this patch I'm definitely system step, right? Like the runes changes are a systems change, right? Like most patches I'm balance step, but this time I can be system step. I just wish Protector's Vow would apply the guarded effect if you target an ally with a spell like a rune on PC. Yes, I have started some conversations with engineers about that, but I don't believe they've had time to investigate that yet. But it is something I have talked with engineers about. I definitely agree that would be a good change. Is Airy proc on buffing abilities fixed in the upcoming patch? I'm not sure, but that is something that I know that someone who isn't me has at least put some time into fixing, but I don't know if when that's coming. But that is something we want to fix at some point. The shield from Echo in the video seemed pretty large. Is there plans for tweaks for that? No. I mean, like, if it's too big, we can make it less big. But it's just like, I have no idea what items the Echo in the video had, right? Like, I don't know. Echo's near the end, right?
Echo enters the distortion field as well.
You can't even see the shield.
A shield, and anyone trapped inside will be frozen.
You can't even see his health bar. You have no idea how big this shield is. All right, let's see.
Completely turns back the clock. In a pinch, he'll also exactly
where do you even see the shield?
Players, well, pretty much every Riot game and Arcane. So we're thrilled. And
Is
he's
that shield
available
big
in,
for Echo?
well, pretty much
I don't
every
know.
Riot game.
I mean, look at this. Like, he's level 10, and these people are level 9. I bet you this Echo has like a million items. Like, these test footage, this test footage stuff is not like, you know, these are not real games. Like, I have no idea what items this guy has. For all I know, he has a death cap and like, you know, he has a death cap and the rest of his slots are large rods or something like that, right? Like, I have no idea. I don't think the ratio on his shield is off. I mean, if it is, we can always fix it, but like, I don't know. Like, don't take the numbers shown in the video as really evidence of anything. You know, because I have no idea what items this Echo has. When Master Yi uses S1 on Barons, yes, we have that logged. Basically, it is currently working. It currently works the way that it is intended to work by our systems, but we want to fix that. Basically, we want to make the timer longer, because it's like, yeah, I won't go into it. We're planning on fixing that at some point. I'm not sure when, but we'll try and address that at some point. Let's see. Please read my comment about silencing. I'm not really just going to address like comments that are just kind of like really out there in terms of like, yeah, you're just like demanding a change for kind of like nonsensical reasons. I don't think there's a ton of reason to go over those comments. I'm much more worried about Ashe being pushed over the top again with lethal tempo than any Echo Shield memes. I mean, if Ashe is too strong, we'll just nerf her, right? Like, you know, I think Ashe should be pretty reasonably able to take both lethal tempo and Kraken, though. Will Hextech Dragon get added at some point? I really enjoyed it. That's something I've been talking about is like, hey, the Hex Gates have really worked really well for PC. I think we should do the Hextech Rift or put, you know, potentially even, you know, stuff like, can we just have Hextechs in our Rift at some point, you know, some way? It's like, you know, there's like Hex Gates are cool. Like, so I don't know. I think there's cool stuff about Hex Gates. So do we need to buy control wards / pink wards like the PC, or is it like the other wards? It's a trinket. So. Echo speed boost was not implemented. No, Echo has a speed boost. He works it's the same as PC. Definitely not everyone agrees, right? It's like there is nothing that needs to be exclusive about Zhonya's Hourglass, right? Or Stasis Enchant, or however you want to call it, right? It's like there's nothing objectively wrong with Stasis as an active, right? It's like, as you know, I think the argument that you could make about Stasis that like on Assassins is that they're not properly giving up enough in the slot, that the trade-offs are not enough, or that the opportunity cost isn't high enough. That is a reasonable argument. The argument that Assassins should never ever be able to have access to Stasis is obviously nonsense, right? It's like, well, you know, what if Assassins can buy it for 2,000 gold, right? Is that acceptable? Because it's like, obviously this is balanceable, obviously this is tunable, right? So the reality here is like the debate is not this is an unacceptable output for this class, but more this is, you know, they're not making the proper trade-offs, or the opportunity cost isn't high enough, right? It's like, I could see that argument, but that's a very different argument, right? Will Pink Wards show Evelynn when she's invisible, or other invisible champions? Pink Wards, like PC, work against camouflage. They do not work against stealth, right? That is the whole purpose of the stealth rework from PC, is that there's a distinction between camouflage, which is you can see near them if you're close enough, right, etc. And stealth, which is like Kha'Zix's ultimate, which is you cannot see them. The Pink Wards will not reveal those champions. Yasuo first skill stack Kraken Slayer. Yes, Yasuo first skill is an attack effect. So it does stack it. I was really scared of Pyke for a while on PC. What version of him were we getting? I hope not to see him as a jungle champion or in the mid lane. We are okay with him being in other roles besides support, as long as he is not significantly better in those roles than support. Our concern, which we spent some time a little bit of time tuning around in dev, and we will follow up if necessary, is that much like PC, his mid lane might be significantly like the champion kit is very favored towards being a roaming mid laner, because of the gold generation on his ultimate, and you know, a bunch of the other mechanics where he's very powerful at roaming, etc. Right? Like all that stuff, you know, etc. Right? It's like, I'm not going to get into all the details here, but it's like PC has had a lot of problems, and they're currently making changes to Pyke because mid lane is so much better than support that they can't balance support properly the way they want to, because of how much more powerful how much more powerful mid lane is. We would not want to get into that same situation, so will make adjustments if that's a problem. But like, if Pyke mid lane is like, you know, say you know, just for sake of argument, let's suppose it was 2% worse than supports. Like, that fundamentally isn't a problem unless the gameplay is really terrible. And that's possible, right? It's like the gameplay on Pyke mid, I think in PC is quite bad. It's probably not as bad in Wild Rift, where, you know, obviously there's a lot more going on, and the gold generation from his ult is just a lot less powerful in Wild Rift because there's just so much more gold in the game, and kills are not as large of a percentage contributor to gold in Wild Rift as they are in PC. So in general, the gold generation is less powerful in Wild Rift, so it's like the play pattern's probably not as much of an issue in mid lane, but we'll see, right? It's like, and if this is a problem, we will address it. Pink Ward will show Evelynn. Her stealth is camouflage, right? Her passive is camouflage. Crit Echo? Don't think that'll be good. Let's see. What are your thoughts on LDR? Would give ADCs an extra item slot to build something defensive and still have full crit when they don't need anti-heal. I think so. I can't speak directly to like why wasn't LDR added in the AD carry item update from last year. I'm not entirely sure because that was not something that I had part in. That was Roguefool and Wavebreak did that update. That was like right as I joined the team that was being shipped, or maybe that was shipped before I don't remember exactly the timeline. Doesn't actually matter. My current thoughts are that I think LDR would be okay in our systems, but I suspect that we actually benefit a lot from having the Mortal, like having Grievous as a common purchase for AD carries. It is possible that that's not the ideal state of the system, but I haven't really spent a ton of time thinking about it, if I'm being honest here. It's like the AD carry item system, like most of the time I spend thinking about is like the earlier items rather than the percent pen items. Like I would probably have to spend some time thinking about it and looking more in detail at the system to have a strong opinion on LDR, honestly. Like I just don't have a super like great answer, honestly, as to like, do we think LDR would be better for the systems? Like, I'm actually not sure, right? I need to spend some more time on it. How about good old Tank Echo? Gat was telling me they were testing some Tank Echo. The game analysis team was telling me that they were testing it out and having some like mild success, but that they felt regular Echo was better. So we'll see. Will you implement Nautilus Q reset when you hit walls? As far as I know, his Q, like the mechanics are similar, so it should pretty much be the same as far as I'm aware. Sorry, I'm trying to keep up with chat. There's a lot. I can't talk like too much about the details of Pink Wards. You'll have to wait till patch notes to see that stuff. I am pretty sure I'm not supposed to talk about like exact details on mechanics and all that. So I can give a general sense of stuff, especially things that things that were supposed to be clear in this video, like the true damage on Kraken Slayer. But yeah, I don't think that I should go into too much detail about all the mechanics and stuff. Wait till patch notes. Do you think we'll ever get the PC effect for challenging Smite? I feel like most jungle players just go blue Smite every game. No, I don't. I don't want the PC effect for challenging Smite at all. I'm very happy that the Wild Rift designers decided not to go with that. I think the PC effect on challenging Smite is like extremely unreasonable. It is, I think, just really bad for the game in terms of it is way more powerful than it feels. Like, small percentage damage reduction is, in my opinion, really, really just not good for the game, especially when it's communicated really poorly like it is on Red Smite. And the stacking, like, true damage over time is really, really low satisfaction for how powerful it is. Basically, my problem statement with challenging Smite isn't fundamentally the output of it, but just that the power to satisfaction ratio is, I think, one of the worst in the game, of like certainly the worst by far of any summoner spell that's ever been in PC League or Wild Rift. And I think it is worse than almost any champion ability I can think of, like in terms of power to satisfaction ratio. Like, I think it's just terrible. So that there's a lot of reasons why I really don't like Red Smite. I like PC's version of Red Smite. Hex Flash was on table. Yeah, Hex Flash is actually something we talked about doing for the inspiration tree. Like I said, we had a lot of really good runes that we wanted to do. Hex Flash was one of them, or like one of the potential options that didn't make it too far down the list in terms of like, we just thought the other options were better. But Hex Flash is definitely an option in the future. It's definitely something we're open to. Won't Kraken Slayer be broken on Vayne? No. I suspect Lethal Tempo will be significantly better for Vayne than Kraken Slayer. I mean, that was my feeling. I played a few games of Vayne in testing. I played one game of Kraken Slayer Vayne, and I was like, no, I'd much rather have Lethal Tempo. I would be shocked if Kraken Slayer is actually better on Vayne than Lethal Tempo. Like, that would be very surprising to me. Let's see. Sorry. Oh, I saw something about Nautilus anchor hitbox. I believe that the way the hitbox works in Wild Rift is vastly simplified from PC. At least that was what it looked like when I was working looking at the scripts internally. But I'm not really a super expert on like understanding how all the hitboxes and stuff work. So I'm not 100% sure that that's true. But it looked much simpler. The PC version, the reason why the PC version feels so weird is that it has different hitboxes for hitting champions versus minions, which is what causes a lot of the really weird behavior. I believe ours works a little differently, but again, I'm not 100% sure about that. But I haven't seen any like really bizarro hooks in testing, and looking at the scripts, it looks like it just works like a normal hitbox, so I think it's probably fine. We'll see though. What do you think of porting Shadowflame into Wild Rift? I don't think there's really any value in that, right? Like, Shadowflame has a similar spot as where our Infinity Orb is, except it's reversed, where Shadowflame is a poke item and Infinity Orb is like an execute item, right? But they're basically the same item, right? Like, we could easily make it reversed, right? It's like where Infinity Orb crit you at high HP, in much the same way that Shadowflame has more Magic Pen at high HP, right? And like, Shadowflame could easily be more Magic Pen as someone gets lower, right? The mechanics are like easily transferable, right? So they basically have, like, they're almost exactly the same item, just in reverse, if that makes sense, like in terms of the target selection. The anti-shielding aspect of Shadowflame is, I mean, I don't want to say it's a joke, but like, it's so mild that it doesn't really, it makes no difference, right? It's like, if we wanted an actual anti-shielding mage item, we would make a real anti-shielding mage item in Wild Rift, right? That isn't like incredibly mild, that actually has real anti-shielding properties. I don't necessarily think we want to do that, but that's what we would do if we wanted to do it. We wouldn't want to have like cosmetic anti-shielding, which is basically what Shadowflame is, right? And generally, I just think Infinity Orb is a version of like Shadowflame is basically just Infinity Orb with less good visuals, right? Because PC can't do spell crits like we can, right? PC doesn't have the tech to do spell crits, so they can't do Infinity Orb, right? It's like, I would put good money that if PC had the tech, they would have just made Infinity Orb instead of Shadowflame, right, when they made that item, because it's just a design that's more appreciable, right? Like, you can just see it better. So let's see. He's not in charge of champions, only balancing. I'm not even in charge of balancing. I'm just one member of the systems and balance team. So to be clear here, technically the design lead for my team is Soul Crushed, but that's not me, right? I'm Endstep. But Soul Crushed is quite busy. He's also the design lead for Champ's team. So really, most of the work, and by most I mean basically 100% of the actual day-to-day design work of systems and balance is done by me and Zekerman, which is another designer on my team. So let's see. PC is so backwards. Yeah. I mean, there's nothing wrong with Shadowflame in their systems. Well, I shouldn't say that. I think there are some things wrong with Shadowflame in their systems, in that I don't love having Magic Pen options for them. There are some good things about it and some downsides. I personally wouldn't have done it if I were in their position. But, you know, I don't fault them for doing it. It's like, it is a way to get people invested into the spike, like the second item spikes. And it is a good way to do second item spikes in their system with Mythics. I personally don't really love flat Magic Pen stacking as an output, as an optimal output for champions, because I think it's really unintuitive for how powerful, like relative to how powerful it is. But nothing fundamentally wrong with it. But I do think that Infinity Orb is just a better item. Like, if I were taking those two items, I would take Infinity Orb. Like, if I were like pretty much any system, I'd take Infinity Orb every time. Let's see. How much time and budget it would take if we had the option to edit the button layouts individually for each champion? I'm not sure. I assume quite expensive, but I don't know. What AP item would you like to be implemented on Wild Rift if it was only up to you? I think the two that I've been looking at are Cosmic Drive and Riftmaker, probably. I think very clearly our system is missing a big haste item. That could be Cosmic Drive. Doesn't have to be Cosmic Drive, but like some item that just has a lot of haste on it in the mage system is something I think we're clearly missing. Like, if you're a mage, right? Like, say you're Brand or Ziggs or Orianna or whatever, and you want haste, there's no item to buy after, like, your first item, right? It's like if you buy your Ludens, and then it's kind of like, okay, what do I buy if I want a haste item? It's like, I think that's clearly missing in our system. And then I think Riftmaker would be cool. I think it's just a fun item, and I think in a non-mythic system, I think it actually is a lot more interesting, right? Like where there's some potential for, like, some more potential for champions to buy it as like a third or fourth item, which I think could be really, really compelling in our systems. But it would be something I'd have to test for sure, because it's possible that's actually not good, right? Like, it's possible that's actually not something we want, but I think the applications are like compelling. Let's see. Magic Pen? No. Magic Crit? Yes. That's... The people understand me. Let's see. Do you have any plans to change the stats that Awakened Soul Stealer gives? Other AP mana items are generally better. Maybe HP instead of mana. It's something we've talked about. I do think that taking it out of the mana system is something that would make a lot of sense. Not saying we're definitely doing that or that's something we're like immediately planning, but it is something that we've been talking about as like, yeah, it probably should not give mana because we have so many mana items, right? It's like, I think that's generally something we'd be happier with. Any opportunities for enchants such as Prowler Claw or Everfrost to challenge Stasis? We do want to do something about Stasis like at some point. No specific plans or like any updates on like we're this is the patch where we're going to divert pick rate away from Stasis or whatever. But it's like it is something we want a space that we want to work in for sure. Like that is something that we want to address at some point. But no promises on if or when we'll ever do that. It's not that we need LDR, it's more towards being able to build something defensive like GA while still having full crit, or is that a trade-off that ADCs should pay off for full crit? The intention of the AD carry item system is that you should be able to go full crit and buy a defensive item. That's why the items give 25% crit. I don't know if if the original designers of Wild Rift's AD carry item system specifically were looking for you have to make a trade-off between a defensive item and armor pen. I assume they probably wanted that, and that's why Mortar Reminder doesn't have crit, but I'm not 100% sure. In my opinion, I think it's pretty reasonable to ask AD carries to make that trade-off, right? And it's like, and I also think it's pretty reasonable for AD carries players to say they don't want to make that trade-off and they just go 75% crit, right? Like, I think that's fine. I do think there are some pretty meaningful satisfaction wins in being able to hit 100% crit, though, so like, maybe we are supposed to open up more options there. Again, it's a space I haven't really spent a ton of time thinking about, so, like, honestly, I don't have like a super strong opinion on like, this is definitely the way the system should go, or like, that's definitely the way the system should go. Not sure. I actually don't really buy Infinity Orb ever, right? Like the main AP, like when I go mid, I play TF and I never buy Infinity Orb on TF. I literally don't think I've bought Infinity Orb on TF ever, right? Like I don't think I've done that once. I don't even think it's a particularly good item on him. Do you know if they have any plans to not level cap accounts at level 40? I don't know, and if I did know, I certainly wouldn't be able to tell you. But I don't know, so I have no idea. I will say, hopefully soon, I might have some more insight into stuff happening on the like around game side of things, because there is a little bit of a reorganization happening, such that hopefully those people, like I should be talking to those people a little more frequently. There's like some reorganization with the teams happening, so that those teams will be like the people who work on the the designers who work on the game should generally be in a few more meetings together. So hopefully I'll be able to keep up with them a little bit more easily. But of course I won't be able to talk about that on my stream. I'll just be a little more aware of it. Mage item diversity, think we could definitely do some good work there for sure. Someone leaked that there will be champion buffs and nerfs in 3.2. Is that true? No comment. Defensive items are getting stale and no one is using Seed Jar. Just check the 3.2 patch notes. Are there plans on more energized passive items for mages and bruisers? It's something we've talked about. Like, I personally really like the energized system. Um, but it's not something that we're like, wow, we really need to use this system. But it's like, I think it's a good system, generally speaking. Nothing wrong with it. So we're definitely open to more items in the Energize system for sure, for potentially for other classes as well. I just think it's a good system. How Kraken works with Ash Q. Each Ash Q is one attack. Each Ash Q applies on hit effects multiple times, but Kraken is an on attack effect. So each Ash Q attack will apply one stack of Kraken Slayer. So that's it. Let's see. We need Demonic and Riftmaker. I mean, I think a version of Demonic that is more distinct from Liandry's, because in our system, Demonic and Liandry's would be in the same slot, right? Like, I think the current version of PC's Demonic is a little more interesting, where like AP per health is kind of a compelling output, right? Like something like that. But we wouldn't want to have burn on it because we already have Liandry's, right? The difference in PC is that Liandry's is a mythic, and so they can have two burn items because they essentially have two different item systems where there can be some overlap in those spaces. But we can't necessarily do that because we don't have mythics. So if we wanted to do Demonic, which I think is a reasonable thing we could do, especially if we wanted to add champions like Mordekaiser, for example, or we wanted to like increase item diversity for champions like Singed, which I think would also be reasonable. We do have Singed. It probably would have to not have burn because or Liandry's would have to do something else. Thank you all for the hydrates. No luck, hope, or support items. It's something we've talked about, not something that we have any like specific plans for right now. And even if we did, I certainly wouldn't be able to tell you. You talked about screen space and limitation about visibility. I find myself struggling when champ's HP bar is out of the screen, but the lower part is still in, so it doesn't trigger the little bubble showing the champ an HP bar. Wouldn't it be better to use the HP bar as the center to calculate when to show the bubble? That does make sense to me. I will mention that to... Actually, let me write notes here to talk to the UX designer about this stuff. Oh, you just saw my cursor fly across the screen. Champ, health bar, bubble, center. Can this be moved to the health bar to check if the bubble should show? And then the other one I want to talk to him about was the location of champion icons for holding to see their viewpoint. Point is inconvenient for pressing and moving. All right, I have noted both these down to talk to him. Again, I can't promise anything, right? But like, you know, I can at least mention them to him. There's just no items for Singed right now except Liandry's, which is relatively weak on components. I mean, he has Death... Or, sorry, why did I say Death... What the hell am I talking about? He has Rylai's too, right? Like, Rylai's is quite good on Singed. Although Rylai's is weak. For sure. Could use a buff. Let's see. My internet goes off, so Kraken Slayer works with Ash Q. Ash Q is an attack. Each attack is one attack. Ash Q applies on hit effects multiple times, but Kraken Slayer is an on attack effect, so it just like each Ash Q attack is just an attack. That's it. There's no meaningful interaction with Kraken Slayer. It will work, but it won't stack it multiple times. Okay. Let me catch up with the chat. How will Akshan passive work with Kraken and Lethal? Akshan passive is an attack, so it will work with Kraken and it will work with Lethal. Just the way you would probably expect, right? So Akshan's second hit, that's an attack, just like Lucian. So that will give you a stack of Kraken Slayer, or apply it if you have 2 stacks. Why do some champions have different AD/AP ratios in some of their abilities, even though they are significantly better with building AP/AD? For example, Akali or Cat. Like they have AD ratios, but because you'll get so much AP, why have those AD ratios at all? Some more examples would be Kai'Sa's W2. Like, why does it have an AP ratio? So there's a lot of different reasons. Like, there's no one unifying reason of like, this is why we have, you know, AD or AP ratios in the game, right? Like non-mainline build AD or AP ratios, right? There's a lot of different reasons why. One reason is that the intention with every is that every spell in the game could be scaled, and it can be scaled in some way, right? There are you will struggle to find examples of spells that don't scale with anything, right? You'll notice that like spells in the game, you know, this is a design decision made in PC League a long time ago, where they decided everything should scale with something, whether that's the enemy's max HP or AP, AD, whatever, right? This is part of the reason why there are some weird AP ratios on AD champions, right? Nothing wrong with that. There are other reasons, right? Like for Kai'Sa, for example, the AP ratio was added intentionally as, hey, we kind of want like when Kai'Sa was being designed, originally what happened there was she had I believe it was the E of like the supercharger evolved, the stealth that came first. This was intended as a hyper carry output of like, oh, once you get enough attack speed, you'll get this. And then people liked it so much that Jag, the designer of Kai'Sa, was like, oh, I should do an evolve for all of these spells. But the W wasn't really intended to be a part of her core pattern. And so what he thought was like, let's do an off build here where this could scale with AP, and then we have the AP evolve here for a functional off build. Right now, obviously, PC has run into a lot of issues with this off build, which is why they just absolutely blasted the AP ratio on Voidseeker recently. But that was the original design intent, was that would be a viable, like functional off build. There are several different and there are like other different reasons why different abilities scale with different ratios and like things that are non-standard, right? Like the original version of Akali, like the reason why Akali has AD and AP ratios everywhere, for example, and same thing with Katarina, is that they were intended to be hybrid champions that were played with AD and AP builds, right? And that they could potentially have access to both the AD and the AP item system. Now, I would say in both cases that hasn't really worked out, right? In PC or Wild Rift. So, you know, whether some of these things have worked out correctly or not, that's up for debate, but like, the original design intent here was that, you know, these champions would be hybrid, right? It's like Akali, for example, like her original PC passive was that you had to have a certain threshold of AD or AP just to turn on her passive, right? Like one of her passives was Vamp and the other one was, I don't even remember. It's been so long. I literally don't even remember what Akali's original passive did, right? But like you had to have a certain threshold of AD and AP to activate them. And, you know, you would use like a special rune page to activate these things. But that was the intention, right? So anyway, I don't want to spend like, I could probably spend a good couple hours talking about like AD and AP ratios and like what individual purposes, because there's so many different reasons why a champion might have AD or AP ratios, right? Like there are so many different reasons why. There's not like one unifying reason, like this is why all champions have, you know, AP ratios or AD ratios or whatever, right? It's like, another good reason to have extra AP ratios and AD ratios that you like that might not be used in standard ways is like these actually increase the power of your champion when you get Baron buff, for example, right? Like this isn't a huge reason, but it does make your abilities more satisfying when you have Baron, right? Because Baron gives AD and AP. It doesn't give adaptive force. In both PC and Wild Rift, it gives you just straight up AD and AP, right? So this weirdly means that hybrid ratio champions like Akali and Kayle actually are better with Baron than a champion like, you know, Jhin or Draven or whatever, right? But it also does mean that like Jhin traps, or what's a good like what's a better example of a spell that doesn't scale with the champion's main stat? I'm trying to think of a good example here, and I'm actually like blanking, even though there should be a lot of these. What's like a good example of like an AD champion that has a weird ratio? So like Jax's ultimate third hit passive, right? It scales with AP, which you don't normally build. It actually does more damage when you have Baron, right? That's cool, right? A cool interaction. It's like, and there's not really much cost to having that ratio there, right? Because it normally doesn't do anything. So it's just cool, right? Is there any reason behind why the Phantom Dancer item doesn't have movement speed passive as like in PC? Because the Phantom Dancer that's in Wild Rift right now is an old version from PC. I do think we could probably do some good work in updating it. Not necessarily to do with the current PC version, but that the Lifeline version of Phantom Dancer I think pretty clearly doesn't work that well in Wild Rift. So I think there's some good work to be done there. Pantheon's ulti scales with AP. Yeah, that's a good example. It's like Pantheon's AP ratios are just like, yeah, your ult does more damage when you have Baron, right? Like that's the main, like that's really the most frequent interaction that actually makes Pantheon's ultimate useful. And it's like, hey, if a support buffs you with Staff of Flowing Water and you ult someone, you'll do a little more damage, right? That's cool. You probably won't ever notice it. It probably, you know, it's rarely going to be relevant, but like what's the cost of having the AP ratio there, right? It's like nothing, right? Like there's no cost there, right? So essentially it's just the main gist of it is just that like the cost of having a lot of these ratios, like having these like random one-off ratios is very low. It allows us to scale the spells in cool ways and like create some potentially interesting interactions and potentially interesting off builds. There's like a lot of good reasons to have them, and the cost is really minimal. So let's see. The healing / shielding scalars, all the enchanters are higher in PC because we don't have healing plus healing shielding as an item stat. Yes, that is true. Yeah. Why stop bringing Kraken Slayer as an item? Bringing as a rune. I've talked about this several times. I don't want to get super in detail, but the short version is like, we don't have mythics. Kraken Slayer doesn't make sense in a non-mythic system. It does, however, have really good applications for a rune system, particularly in context of as a supplement to auto attackers in addition to lethal tempo, right? Because it basically has the opposite appeal of lethal tempo, where lethal tempo is good for champions that want a lot of attack speed that don't have attack resets and attack speed in their kits. Kraken Slayer is the opposite, where it's very good for champions that already have attack speed steroids or attack resets in their kit, or the ability to apply like multiple on attack effects. So looking at champions like, you know, Kraken Slayer is going to be more optimized for champions that wouldn't want lethal tempo anyway, like Akshan, Lucian, Shyvana, etc., or even Tristana. Whereas lethal tempo should be more generically appealing to champions that just like want stats, right? Again, I don't really want to keep going in detail on that, though. I've answered that question multiple times at this point. Yes, Echo has the speed boost.
Game and Arcane. So we're thrilled to
It does look like he doesn't have it here, though. It's very bizarre. Maybe they might have just been testing a bugged version. But yeah, that is weird.
He's available in, well, pretty much every Riot game and Arcane. So we're thrilled to finally
Yeah, that is
bring
bizarre.
League's
I agree. They must have just been testing a bugged version. Mythics are never going to come to Wild Rift? Basically never. Yeah, I think the chances of that are basically 0%. There's no reason why we'd want Mythics. I mean, I wasn't the one who did the work on Echo, but as far as I know, his passive gives movement speed. I guess I played him a couple times really early on. I'm pretty sure it gives movement speed, but I mean, if we took it out, I'm sure it was for good reason. But I'm not an expert. Let's see. Imagine give Karma rework to Darius every 5 AA he uses passive old ult. I'm not sure what you mean. I'm struggling here. Oh, you mean putting his ult as his passive? That would be spicy. Yeah, that would definitely be spicy. I don't think we'd want to do that, but it would be interesting. When are we getting anti-heal on Sinjar? Something we could do. I don't know if we really want to, but I don't think it's like something that's crazy. Let's see. Having Giant Slayers or Runes scares me. Tanks feel underwhelming on Wild Rift currently. Sentiment I've seen. If tanks do feel underwhelming, I mean, I'm not opposed to like buffing tanks if they're actually weak, but like the feeling of tanks being underwhelming is not correlated to their power, because I've had people telling me I've had random people coming here and there into my stream and telling me tanks are bad, and that's just not true. Like, factually speaking, tanks win a lot of games. There are some specific areas where we'd like to improve tanks. The clearest area is elite. Elite level play, tank supports do not perform as well as we would like. And there are a few and several of our tanks in Wild Rift do not perform super well in higher MMRs overall. Amumu and Rammus are the prime offenders here, but that's like kind of to be expected. Might be too extreme, right? The fall off might be too extreme, and like I think there might be some interest for us to like, hey, ask champions like, hey, can you make a version of Amumu that is less low MMR skewed, for example? It's like that's something that I think we'd be open to at some point, but it's not something that we're like desperately looking to address here. I want to ask Raiden Step a question. Can we hit on-hit effect Katarina like per PC version? No. There's a lot of reasons why I don't think we should do on-hits on Katarina. And I am not the only person that has a say in this, so I can't say like definitively we will never do it. But my answer would be, I think it does not. It is pretty unlikely that we'll do it because I think that the benefits seem very unclear and the downsides seem very clear and very significant, right? Like the on-hit stuff for Katarina in PC has like very clearly not had very clearly caused a lot of problems, and I think the gains are very unclear. Like, what are they actually getting out of it? I don't think that we would want to do the same thing. Again, that's not to say that we'll never ever do it or that there's not a place or a time where we might want to. Like that, times change and champions, their position changes over time. It's like, and the item system could change, and maybe we'd actually want this in the future. But I think it's really unlikely. I just don't think that on-hit changes for Katarina and PC have really been good for Katarina. That's my personal perspective. So, yeah. I would love a higher MMR version of Amumu and Rammus. Yeah, that would be cool. I mean, so the reason why Rammus Ultimate was changed in Wild Rift, one of the goals for that was to make him better in higher MMR. It unfortunately didn't work super well. I mean, it did probably, bridge some of the gap, but it wasn't enough by itself, right? So it's possible we could do more work there. But Amumu is really the big problem case where like Amumu, I believe, is currently our largest skew champion in terms of his difference in win rate between our lowest MMR bracket and the highest, which is elite. I believe Amumu is our largest skew champion in the game right now. I'm not 100% sure about that, but I think that that's true. So Amumu is definitely one who could benefit from some smoothing there, where like we actually like cannot, balance him for both sides at the same time, right? Like he has to be strong or weak in one or the other because of how large the gap is. Let's see. I hope Cloud Drake never comes back ever. We'll see. I mean, I think a redesigned version of Cloud Drake, maybe with some more interesting terrain, could be cool, and a different, maybe a different, buff, etc. It's like there's nothing wrong fundamentally with like the Cloud Dragon concept. I just think that the outputs of the buff and the terrain that PC has aren't particularly exciting. So yeah, I could see us bringing in Cloud Drake at some point, just with some different outputs though. But like, not Cloud Drake like itself, right? Like all of the outputs, if that makes sense. Thanks, Raiden Step. Really useful answers. No problem. Hey, I know it's not your area, but what do you think about music vid? Like, yeah, I'm not even gonna bother. Keep reading. I just can't keep up with all of the like, hey, it's not your area, but can you ask this random person that you don't know about this, or like, what are your thoughts on this random thing that you don't know anything about? I think I probably should just skip those questions. I think Eve might have a larger skew than Amumu. I don't know off the top of my head, yeah, but Eve's skew is also quite large. That is Rogue. That is the actual Rogue Fool, by the way. So that's some, some real hot, fresh data coming, But yeah, even Amumu, I think, are the largest. Like, one of them is the largest, I think, but I'm not 100% sure. The funny thing is they're skewed in opposite directions, right? So it's pretty funny. Rengar's skew is also pretty large. But it's less than Amumu, or sorry, it's less than Eve's, I believe. Let's see. Would love to see the terrain about it being more interesting too. Yeah. That's definitely something we would want if we wanted to do Cloud. I think, to me, one of the biggest failures of Cloud is like how like uncool the terrain is. That was something, because I worked on the original Elemental Rift in PC. That was something I was always sad about, because we had some other versions that we worked on originally in PC that were cooler, or at least that I personally felt were cooler, but they were either like considered to be too risky at the time, or not connected to the cloud theme enough that, you know, they kind of eventually ended up getting scrapped, and we went with the kind of just movement speed buff in area version, which I think wasn't great. Let's see. Shyvana in Elemental Rift is so weak. What is your plan on her? I cannot tell you what the plan is, but that is a Champions Team thing. Champions Team will address her when Elemental Rift goes live. Like, when Elemental Rift replaces the regular Rift, Shyvana will receive changes. Those changes are already planned, but I cannot tell you what they are. Forget Cloud, give us Hextech Dragon. Yeah, I mean, if we were just going to port another dragon from PC, I think Hextech would be the obvious one that, like, it's just really cool. I think people really like it. I really like the Hex Rift. I love the Hex Gates. I think there's a lot of cool stuff about it. So, yeah, I would love to bring in Hextech Drag. You know, I'd be totally open to that, and I think it's just, Hextech Dragon, I think pretty much everyone's positive on it, both at like outside of Riot and externally. So, you know, if we're ever like, hey, we want to just add one dragon, you know, Hextech would be the obvious choice there, right? Will you guys buff champs that use invisibility as one of their core parts of the kit because control wards are out of the game? Not in the same patch. If these champions show up as weak afterwards, we will buff them, but I think that is almost certainly not going to happen. I think it is extremely unlikely we even see any noticeable change in the data because of control wards. But my team does not agree. They think that we'll see some small changes, but I think we won't see any like direct impact on them. But we'll see. I suspect, though, that this doesn't like the control wards existing doesn't actually affect their overall win rates. Now, I mean, their win rates could change because of other systemic things. Like, we have a lot of stuff in the patch. So, like, obviously, it could be the case that, like, Evelynn and Rengar and so on, you know, will have some, you know, win rate changes just because, like, you know, have significant win rate changes because of the patch. But I doubt control wards actually have a significant impact. Let's see. In patch 3.2, turrets have 5 plates? No, we're not doing turret plating in patch 3.2. I think turret plating is cool, and we could do it at some point. Or, like, we could do, like, 5 plates and then extended laning phase, kind of similar to PC, where the whole motivation to do turret plates in the first place was, in PC, was because the laning phase wasn't sacred, and the plates were there to create a non-trapped, good-feeling laning phase, if that makes sense. There's probably a better set of terms to do about that. It's like, I think we could potentially do something similar to make our laning phase a bit longer, but something that people would feel good about opting into. I think that there's room for doing something like that in the future. But, you know, no promises, no plans, you know, not something that we're, like, actively working on. It's like, you know, I could see us doing something like that. Control words do not, they're camouflage only. They don't work on stealth. What was said about the Kraken Slayer rune was a bit confusing. Kraken Slayer does do true damage. Any thoughts about adding alcoves? I don't think in isolation we would add alcoves. Changing the map geometry is quite expensive. And alcoves by themselves are not really that valuable. Like, they are very marginal value up, but not worth making changes to the map. I think if we were going to make other changes to the map, like map geometry, such that we already had people working in that space, then we could maybe talk about doing alcoves and whether we actually want them or not. But alcoves really for PC are very marginal value and certainly not worth the work by themselves. So it's not like we would, you know, imagine a patch where it's like we spend a bunch of time and effort on alcoves and that's like the major thing that you get for the patch. It's like, that would not be good, right? Like, alcoves are rarely relevant. So, like, we would not want to do that as, like, as an individual change. So it's like, not like we're just going to go do alcoves and that's our big change for a patch or anything like that. And it would cost a lot to make them. So it's like, we would only do that, I think, most likely in combination with other map geometry changes, if we wanted to do those. I'm not going to answer questions about Kraken Slayer as a rune. I've talked about that so much already. I'm just going to, like, just skip over past those. Let's see. What are your thoughts about Hail of Blades? So I talked about this. My original pitch for the slot that would eventually go on to be Lethal Tempo was Hail of Blades. The reason why we didn't go with Hail of Blades was because we wanted to be really confident that the the rune that we were putting in that slot would be a broadly appealing keystone for auto attackers, and we were much more confident that we could hit that goal with lethal tempo than Hail of Blades. There were also some concerns around the gameplay of Hail of Blades pushing us into the burst AD carries area, particularly given that our AD carry items, our AD carry items are much more favorable to the fast burst. We have the big Infinity Edge, we have a lot of big AD 25% crit items. There were some concerns around the gameplay there of does this lead us too close to the path that PC is now trying to dig itself out of, where we have too much damage and too much burst in the game.